Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. Today we're actually going to revisit the topic that I was talking about, like not last video, but the last two videos before that, regarding the new rule in 2024 around moving around other creatures. We talked about, a number of different ways that we could try to make that happen using like push masteries and things like that by pushing creatures into other creature spaces, but we never really spent a whole lot of time trying to go over ways that we could try to push ourselves into other creature spaces. So we're going to kind of try to dig into that today, and I'll also say this again throughout the video that this might not necessarily be rules as written type stuff. We will try to support our argument with things that we can find in the rules, but there isn't really clear guidance on it. We can always use like common sense to try to be like, well, obviously I think this is what they mean just because that makes sense. But sometimes it's kind of fun to like bend the rules or push the rules a little bit. So there's stuff in here for both players and DMs. So without further ado, let's just get into whatever it is that I'm going to talk about here. So the last couple times, like I mentioned, we were talking about this new rule in the 2024 Player's Handbook where it says, if you somehow end a turn in a space with another creature, you have the prone condition unless you are tiny or of a larger size than the other creature. So like I said in my last videos, we mainly focused on using like push effects to push enemies around, ideally into the same space as another creature to cause them to, one or both of them to have the prone condition. However, we also want to take a look at how we can move ourselves into other creature spaces, but we had this sort of tricky first line here that says you can't willingly end a move in a space occupied by another creature. I previously pointed out in another video that the Handbook's rabbit hop doesn't use our movement. It is just a bonus action to jump into another space, and that space doesn't need to be unoccupied. However, there was another commenter, and it's a frequent commenter of mine. They usually try to keep me pretty honest, and I certainly appreciate that, but they said, okay, well, this is a jump. It clearly moves you, even if it doesn't follow the normal jump rules. This is still clearly a move. So that's the question then, right? Is a move anything that moves you? Is it anything that uses our movement? Is it only things specifically that happen during our movement as opposed to our action, bonus action, or even reaction? And I said on multiple occasions that I tend to lean on things being more functional rather than less functional. When I see this rule that says we can't willingly end a move in a space occupied by another creature, my mind immediately goes, okay, if I can't willingly end a move in a space occupied by another creature, what are some things that would be an unwilling move, such as like a command flee, or there's like a willing non-move, such as if an ally pushes me with the telekinetic feat, but I choose to fail the save. It isn't my move, but I'm choosing to do it. Does that count as that? Or there's also an unwilling non-move, such as being pushed by an enemy. In this video, we're mainly going to be focused on willing non-moves, and specifically those that are personally under our own control, such as the Handbook's rabbit hop, where I choose to take my bonus action to jump a number of feet equal to 5 times my proficiency bonus. In order to do that, I had to look at what's written in the book as far as rules around if it gives us any clarity as to what the rules would consider as a move. So before I get started with this, again, I'm going to say that we are entering very questionable rule space. So things may be illogical or inconsistent with real life. It's probably going to feel like we're splitting unnecessary hairs. It's probably also just not going to be in what some would consider the spirit of the rule. So definitely on the spectrum of rules as written to rules as cool, we're definitely skewing towards the latter. If you are a player and you like anything that I have to say in this video and you want to kind of maybe build around it in one of your own builds, definitely talk with your DM, and always, as always, be okay with the answer no, because we're going to be kind of pushing the boundaries of the rules for sure. But again, like I said, I do have things in here for DMs as well. I think that this rule benefits DMs more than it actually benefits the players. I know I usually come at things from a player perspective, but that doesn't mean that I don't think about things from the DM perspective as well. And if I wouldn't put something in a video that I wouldn't necessarily allow at my own tables. With all that being said, let's get started with what is a move? So we have this rule, we can't willingly end a move in a space occupied by another creature. So D&D does lack a definition for what a move or movement is in general. The rules around moving around other creatures, in which this highlighted rule is found under the more general section for movement and position in the combat section in the Player's Handbook. First paragraph of that section is listed here. So these rules only mention things like, you're climbing, jumping, crawling, swimming, anything that normally happens during your movement. So that the common ground here is that each of these things are both measured by your speed and happen as part of your movement, as opposed to your action or bonus action or even again reaction. And this is also kind of supported by another paragraph in that same section for breaking up your move. This is again another rule that we should all be familiar with, where you can break up your move either like between your action and bonus action, or even during your action under the attack rules, where you can attack, move, and then attack again. That movement is still your movement. It is not part of your action. It just happens during your action, but it's still your move, because there are other features that may allow you to move as part of your action. However, even for me, who I think can be very generous with the rules sometimes. I don't feel like this was concrete enough for me to feel like I had any confidence in saying that if an action, bonus action, or reaction allows you to change your position, that it doesn't count as a move. So much so that this video was actually supposed to be the one that was released last Sunday, but then I scrapped it because, again, I wasn't confident in my own justifications here. I basically scrapped it halfway through and then ended up doing the video on slow. I didn't even really like the way that video ended up being out. I didn't feel like I could put the work into it that I wanted to, but I couldn't help but think that if I wanted to be able to concretely prove to myself that a move only refers to the movement part of your turn, then I would need to see something that actually differentiates a move from an action, a bonus action, or even a reaction. So then as I was going through that last video and kind of going through different spells and things like that, I was able to find actually one example, and then that example got my wheels turning, and then I found another example as well. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one I found that distinguishes a move from an action or bonus action is the spell Tasha's Mind Whip. So Tasha's Mind Whip, a failed save against this spell, causes the affected creature to have to choose between a move, an action, or a bonus action on their next turn, and they only get one. So that means if we choose an action, then we get to take that action no matter what that action does. If we take a bonus action, we get to take that bonus action no matter what that bonus action does. But if we move, then that's all we get to do. So that means if we have an action that moves us or a bonus action that moves us, such as the Heron Guns, Rabbit Hop, we can still move as part of that action. We just can't take our movement part of our turn. However, if there is an action or a bonus action that just gives us extra movement, such as the dash action doesn't actually happen as part of the actual action. It just gives you more movement on your turn. We could take the dash action under the effects of Tasha's Mind Whip, but we just couldn't use that extra movement that we got because we already used our action and therefore we can't move. So this plus the general movement rules only referring to movement that happens during the movement part of our turn, as well as being able to occur between different actions such as our bonus action and actions and different attacks during the attack action. This suggests to me at least that the movement that can happen as part of an action or a bonus action isn't considered a move, at least according to the text of Tasha's Mind Whip. So I know some of y'all might already be rolling your eyes if you weren't already with things that I've said previously. And I get it, we are pretty in the weeds here, but just stay with me. So this is sort of just exhibit A, and this one, at least for me, for my purposes, for my table, would have been enough for me to be like, yep, okay, I'll go ahead and allow this, that, movement during actions or bonus actions doesn't count as a move for the purposes of willingly entering another creature's space. But we might also be thinking, you know what, this is just a very specific case. This is one specific spell that has this wording. Is there a more general rule that also has the same or even similar language where it's comparing movement to an action, bonus action, or even a reaction? And of course there is. I was able to find at least one more, and that is the rules for avoiding opportunity attacks. So these rules say that you also don't provoke an opportunity attack when you teleport, of course, or when you are moved without using your movement, action, bonus action, or reaction. So our movement on our turn is our move, our action is our action, our bonus action is our bonus action, our reaction is our reaction. Movement as part of our bonus action is still our bonus action, it is not our move. So again, the original rule said that you can't willingly end a move in a creature space, and that could technically refer to movement from any source. But then of course we could refer back to Tasha's Mind Whip that distinguishes a move from an action, a bonus action, or a reaction. Again, this is all to say that a DM is still fully within the right to say that this is dumb and they won't allow it. I certainly wouldn't fault them for that. But even if we could all agree on the interpretation of the rules as presented here, we could probably also all agree that this likely isn't the intention of the rule, which can also be an important thing to consider. But like I said, I think this is not only a cool thing that a player could do, but I think it's even cooler for DMs. But before we get into all the different ways that we could use things that are our bonus action, actions, or reactions to move around into creature spaces, let's first again cover the limitations that come with the rules around moving into other creatures' spaces. So from the player's perspective, players will want to be bigger than the other creatures or else they will fall prone too. Not only that, but the other creatures can't be tiny because tiny creatures aren't affected by this rule. So as a medium creature, which the vast majority of PCs are, this would limit us to small enemies only. If we can get large, then of course then we can affect medium or small creatures, but there's only so many features that will let you do that. And then of course if we are small, then we can't really affect enemies with this other than those that are also small, but then we're also risking falling prone ourselves. If we look at the new 2024 monster manual, of course there's tons of monsters in D&D, but just referencing the monster manual just to kind of get an idea of how many of those creatures are small. That would limit players to 36 creatures. However, it is worth also noting that most humanoid species have the option of being small in 2024. Only a couple of them must be small, like the halfling and the gnome. And this also isn't to say that small creatures are necessarily uncommon. And certainly if you're in combat with one small creature, you're probably in combat with many small creatures, such as your goblins, your kobolds, and other small sort of pack creatures like that. If a player is going to use this against a creature of the same size, because maybe they can't get bigger, but they want to take advantage of being able to move in their space and knock them prone to maybe set up for one of their allies, then they also need to probably make sure that they aren't in a position where the other enemies in the fight can't take advantage of them being prone. And ideally that creature that they knock prone on their turn, because that creature will get their turn before your turn comes back around, that they can't get up from prone and then kind of just go to town on you as well. And also we need to keep in mind that because going prone happens on the end of the turn, that the person who enters that creature space and knocks them prone doesn't get to benefit, at least offensively, from that prone condition. So not only are player characters sort of size limited with how often they could use this, just strategically they might not want to use this all the time. And then as we're going to see in a bit, most of the features that would let them do this are also limited use, or at least very situational as to when they could use them. So they really kind of need moons to align in order to really take advantage of this. So with all that aside, again, operating under the assumption that any movement that occurs during an action, bonus action, or reaction doesn't count as a move, and that a move only refers to movement that happens during the movement portion of our turn. Let's get into looking at the actual features that would let us do that. And we're going to split these into two sections, ones that are specifically measured by speed, which, you know, if you're DM and you kind of like these rules, but you don't want to be able to do them, you might limit it to only movement effects that are not measured by your speed, that are just measured by some different arbitrary number. And then we'll look at ones that aren't measured by speed. So starting with at the top, we have the Barbarian. They have the level 7 feature, the Instinct of Pounce. This one says, as part of the bonus action you take to enter your rage, you can move up to half your speed. They're probably only getting this once during that combat, unless they lose their rage and need to re-enter it, or they could possibly burn a second rage in order to do that. But again, they're burning an extra resource in order to make that happen. Then we move on to the College of Dance. This one has Inspiring Movement. This is the new subclass in 2024. This one not only affects the Bard, but also one ally of their choice within 30 feet as well. This one says when an enemy you can see ends its turn within 5 feet of you, you can take your reaction and expend a use of Bardic Inspiration to move up to half your speed. Then one ally of your choice within 30 feet can also do that using half of their speed and also using their reaction. So even if the Bard themselves isn't big enough to make this happen, or they don't want to put themselves that close to an enemy to make this happen, they can give one of their allies the opportunity to do that instead. But again, that is expending both their reaction, their allies' reaction, and their use of their Bardic Inspiration, all to do that one thing in addition to the effects here. Looking at the Cleric, even the Cleric has at least one feature that lets them do this, and that would be the Peace Domain's Channel Divinity Balm of Peace. This is the one where you can take an action and move around, and whenever you come within 5 feet of a creature, you can choose to heal them a bit. But again, this happens as an action, and it is not related to the normal movement that you get as part of your turn. But again, this is a Channel Divinity. They get only a couple of these per short rest. You know, you get a few more of them in 2024 rules. I think you get at least one back on a short rest. But again, this is just one of those features that could let us enter another creature space, again, operating under the initial assumptions that we made at the beginning of the video. Moving on to the Fighter, the Fighter class has the level 5 feature Tactical Shift. Whenever you activate your second wind with a bonus action, you can move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. So this is again happening during your bonus action. It doesn't happen as part of your normal movement for the turn. Sticking with the Fighter, we also have the Battlemaster subclass. This is the one that allows you to choose an ally that can hear you, and they can use the reaction to move up to half their speed. So you can enable another ally to kind of bum rush another creature. Similarly, again with the Fighter, there's the Champion, the Remarkable Athlete in 2024. This one says, in addition, immediately after you score a critical hit, you can move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. You can only make a critical hit during your action or your bonus action if you have a bonus action attack, or as a reaction if it's an opportunity attack. So this is happening as part of those actions. It is not adding to your total move during the turn. So the Fighter itself is pretty stacked with features that could allow them to do this. But again, Tactical Shift is tied to Second Wind. Battlemaster is tied to the specific maneuver, as well as using the superiority dice. And then the Champion one can only happen on critical hits. They do get the expanded crit range, but it's still not going to be able to happen every turn. Moving on to Paladins, we just have the Oath of Vengeance. So this one says when you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, you can reduce the creature speed to 0 until the end of the current turn. Then you can also move half your speed as part of the same reaction. So not only can they pin them in place, but then they can also get into their space and knock them prone. So they are both prone and their speed is 0, at least until the end of the current turn, which means that they can't get back up. So that's actually a pretty powerful effect. But again, this only happens if the creature provokes an opportunity attack from the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. Moving on to the last couple ones that are measured by our speed, we have the Scout Rogue's Skirmisher feature at level 3. It says when an enemy ends their turn within 5 feet of you, you can use your reaction to move up to half your speed, and that movement doesn't provoke opportunity attacks. I think this is one that's clearly designed to move you away from that enemy, but it doesn't say that we specifically need to move away. So maybe we're not difficult to pin down because we're so slippery and we can get away so easily, but maybe we're difficult to pin down because we are the ones who do the pinning. Lastly, we have the Hadozee species. This one has the glide feature where if you fall at least 10 feet, you can use your reaction to glide a number of feet horizontally equal to your walking speed, and then you take 0 damage from the fall. And then I did mention in a previous video that I think this one is pretty questionable because you can technically use your movement to like try to jump 10 feet in the air and then you glide that way. Falling technically isn't part of your movement, but if you used your movement to make yourself fall, then is that part of movement? So I would say this one, of all the features that I'm covering, absolutely the most questionable of any of them. So those are all the features that are measured by our speed. So let's go on and move on to the features that are not. There are many fewer of these, so The first one's first is the Heron Guns Rabbit Hop. I've mentioned this a couple times already. It is a bonus action to jump a number of feet equal to 5 times our proficiency bonus. We can do it a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus per long rest. So this happens as part of our bonus action. It does not follow the normal jump rules. We can only use it if our speed is greater than 0, but it is otherwise not measured by our speed. The next one would be the Swarmkeeper Ranger. I've mentioned this one in my previous videos about pushing because one of the effects here is a pushing effect. But one of the other effects that we can choose is that we can choose when we hit a creature with an attack to have the swarm move us 5 feet in a horizontal direction of our choice. So this is probably the strongest feature that enables this because all you have to do is hit once per turn. It otherwise doesn't cost a resource other than not using one of the other options that turn. It is only limited to 5 feet, but if you are a melee ranger, that should rarely be an issue for you. The next one is going to be the Shifter species. They have the Swift Stride option. This one says that you can move 10 feet as a reaction when a creature ends its turn within 5 feet of you. So this is similar to the College of Dance Bard and the Skirmisher Rogue, but it is not measured by our speed. It is just a flat up to 10 feet. And then the final feature here would go to the Storm Sorcery Sorcerer subclass. This is the Tempestuous Magic. Comes on at first level if you're still playing by the 2014 rules, or this would be a third level Sorcerer feature if you're playing by the 2024 rules. This is the one that allows you as a bonus action before or after you cast a first level spell to fly up to 10 feet without provoking opportunity attack. So this happens as part of your bonus action and is not related to your normal movement. So those are all the features, or at least all the features that I could find that would enable a player to do this. I don't think there are any feats, or at least there are no feats that I could find that would also enable this in any way. So again, there's a pretty limited list. Again, the fighter has a lot of good options. The Swarmkeeper Ranger specifically has a very powerful option since they can do it every turn without expending a resource. Maybe like a multi-class with the Path of the Giant Barbarian or a Rune Knight fighter could be really abusive with that. But again, the average player is just a medium size, so unless that creature is small, they're going to have limited opportunities to really abuse that anyway. So that is all the features that would be available to the players, but I did want to talk about this from the DM perspective and why I think it's so much better for the DM. So first things first, allowing non-movement moves to let creatures into another creature's space benefits the DM in a far greater capacity than it does the players. There's the obvious reasoning that you're the DM, you get to choose which creatures go in an encounter. If the monsters are too big, tiny, or immune to prone, the players that have these features that could let them get into another creature's space wouldn't be able to use those features in that kind of situation. Having too many enemies in an encounter can make risking yourself going prone by entering the same space as another creature with the same size as you very, very risky. And while only about 40% of the monsters in the 2024 Monster Manual at least are large or bigger, many of the more dangerous creatures tend to be the bigger creatures. So not only that, but the more dangerous, bigger creatures also tend to be legendary. And legendary creatures have legendary actions. And then if we follow the same logic before, then legendary actions that involve movement aren't a move and then can put that creature into a player's space. And not only that, but with the 2024 changes in the Monster Manual, many of the legendary creatures that had a movement part of their legendary actions, where it's just they move up to their speed or whatever, basically all of them had that buffed to movement plus like an attack or movement plus something that they can normally do anyway, usually just movement plus an attack. So not only are they able to move into another creature's space as a legendary action using that movement feature, but they can make that attack either against that creature or another, player character within range. But then that player is also going to fall prone at the end of the turn and they're literally standing over that player. So with that in mind, I wanted to cover all of the monsters in the new Monster Manual at least that have a type of movement as a legendary action. So starting at the lowest available CR, we have the Unicorn at CR 5, so you can do this as early as level 5 if you really want to. The Unicorn is a large sized creature, so it should be able to knock over most player characters. Any of the adult dragons ranging from CR 13 to 17 have a pounce feature where they can move up to half their speed and make an attack. The Shadow Dragon at level 13 has a similar pounce effect. The Vampire is a medium or smaller creature, so you might be limited as to when you can use this, but they also have one of these features. Vampire Umbral Lord at CR 15 also has a similar feature. The Death Knight can also do it at CR 17. The Draco Lich also has a pounce similar to all the other dragons. The Demi Lich is a tiny creature technically, but it does have one of these legendary actions where it can move and do a thing. So if by any chance you just created a large or a huge or a gargantuan Demi Lich, you could technically use that as well. All ancient dragons except for the ancient blue dragon also have the pounce feature that lets them move up to half their speed and make an attack. All of the animal lords have a feral strike that allows them to move up their speed and make an attack. Moving on to CR 22, we have the Elemental Cataclysm. This one already has a feature that allows it to knock creatures prone within 5 feet of it, wherever it ends up. But for sure, any creatures that it's standing over would automatically fall prone. The Ancient Blue Dragon does have a specific legendary action that allows it to move. This is a Cloaked Flight, where it casts invisibility on itself. Then it flies up to half its speed. So it can not only go invisible, but then fly over and land on top of another player character and knock them over. The Colossus has a Stomp at CR 25. And then for the Tarrasque, both of their legendary actions allow them to move and do something as well. So the Tarrasque can just also do the same thing every time they take a legendary action. So if you're a DM and you don't have the 2024 Monster Manual yet, this is basically the new monster design for legendary actions. There's never just movement. They have other things that they can do as part of that. If you're modifying an older existing legendary creature that just has a movement as a legendary action, you can feel good at least by putting an attack on the end of that. Or if you're just homebrewing a monster, then you can at least follow this sort of guideline that by the designer's choices that these should be intended to move and then do something else. So then I also wanted to provide like an actual picture of what this would look like and why it's so much scarier in game to allow these sort of rules to happen, so you can let your players use it whenever they want to use it, but knowing that you can really turn up the heat and really raise the stakes in combat by using it yourself with these kind of legendary actions, or even if certain creatures have bonus actions that can get them in as well. So with that in mind, I would ask you, which situation do you think would be scarier for the players? Would it be picture 1, where the dragon ends its legendary action within, 5 feet of these 2 players over here? They're not prone. There's no difficult terrain for them to get past. They can disengage and clear the dragon's reach if necessary. Or would it be picture 2, where the creatures in the dragon space would then be prone? The dragon space is difficult terrain, and so even if they disengage, they can't stand up and then move 15 feet with a 30-foot speed and clear the dragon's reach. But if I was a player, I'd basically be like pooping my pants at this point. I would feel super threatened. It would be kind of really exciting, something that we've kind of never really seen happen in a combat before. So even if you weren't on board at the beginning of this video, I think this is a really cool reason to consider letting this work this way in your games. So with that in mind, let's move on to my final thoughts. Is this rules as written or even rules as intended? Almost certainly not, but I think, at least for me, there's enough to convince yourself if you want to be convinced. Is it overpowered to be able to do this? Maybe, probably, but any condition without a saving throw would be. But again, most PCs are going to be limited to when they can use it without the ability to get bigger. And even if they can, most of the options for player characters to move into another creature's space are limited use or in some way conditional. Like, the only exception is the Swarmkeeper Ranger. And also, just because a class, subclass, or species has a feature that would enable this, doesn't mean that that character would want to be that close to an enemy. Like we saw, the Sorcerer had a feature that would do that. The Cleric has a feature that would do that. Both of these have smaller hit dice. It's important to keep in mind that just because a player can doesn't mean that they always will. So personally, I think overall, the limited use cases for PCs combined with the fact that most features are either conditional or cost a resource would help it feel special when that actual circumstance comes up for it to happen. Then of course, as the DM, you can always just pick a creature to put in a combat that has one of these abilities to move into another creature space as part of a bonus action or legendary action or whatever it is. And then you can put that pressure on your players whenever you feel like doing that as well. Even if it's not rules as written, even if it's not rules as intended, even if it is maybe a little bit overpowered, but again, a lot of things in 2024 are a little overpowered. Is it cool? I think it's, absolute cinema. Again, the idea of a dragon lurching, like literally standing over a couple players and being so much more difficult to get out of that dragon space, I think is such a cool thing that we've never really had to deal with before. I think it's such a cool vision in my head, at least, that I would absolutely be perfectly okay with allowing this sort of shenanigans in my game. We can let the players have all their fun while they're having their fun, but then when we get to have our fun, we can really dial things up. So that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. And again, this was kind of a wild one. I know we were kind of going off the rails and kind of really skirting the limits of rules, but I just think the idea of the kind of gameplay that this can enable is so much different than anything that we've dealt with before that I think it's at least worth considering putting this in your game if you're a DM. Of course, if you are a player, always ask your DM, always do it in good faith, and always be okay with them saying no. So let me know any and everything that you thought about this video down in the comments below. If you're a DM, would you consider, allowing this interpretation of the rules in your game? If you are a player, how would you feel if a dragon basically landed on top of your space and knocked you prone, and then suddenly you were basically just kind of stuck in the space with that dragon until you can get enough movement or an ally can sort of teleport you out with a vortex warp or a scatter or something. Again, I think there's just so much more strategy that allowing this rule just enables in the game. So again, let me know what you think down in the comments. While you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you are a new viewer or returning viewer to this channel and like what you saw here, please consider hitting that subscribe button and support the channel. I release videos every Wednesday and Sunday, so you always have something to look forward to. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.